I never thought celebrating the biggest achievement of my life would end with my own mother screaming that I was too big for my britches, while storming out of my dream home, taking half my family with her. Even less could I have imagined that David Chen, the president of Metro First National Bank, would be the one to stay behind, quietly helping me clean up the mess while sharing a revelation about my finances that would change everything I thought I knew about my journey to success. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But that Saturday evening confrontation, which shattered years of family dynamics and exposed truths I'd been blind to, became the moment that transformed me from someone desperately seeking approval into a woman who finally understood her own worth. The custom mahogany front door of my new home in Riverside Heights gleamed under the late afternoon sun as I made final preparations for my housewarming party. After 18 months of saving every penny, working 70-hour weeks at my financial consulting firm, and dreaming of this moment, I was finally ready to show my family what their little Nina had accomplished. The house itself was modest by Riverside Heights standards, a charming two-story colonial with 3 bedrooms, but it represented everything I'd worked toward since graduating from State University 5 years earlier. The down payment had required sacrifices that my family never truly understood: skipping dinners out, buying clothes from thrift stores, living in a cramped studio apartment downtown, while watching my college friends enjoy their 20s with expensive vacations and designer handbags. My hands trembled slightly as I arranged the catering spread across the granite countertops of my new kitchen. Nothing fancy, just elegant finger foods and a selection of wines that Rachel Kim, my real estate agent, had recommended for entertaining. The afternoon light streamed through the bay windows I'd specifically requested, illuminating the hand-carved wooden desk that sat prominently in my custom-built home office, visible through the open French doors. That desk had been crafted by Tony Russo, a local artisan whose workshop operated out of a converted warehouse in the Arts District. When I described my vision for a workspace that honored both professionalism and creativity, Tony had understood immediately. The piece featured subtle inlays of different wood types, representing the diverse client base I'd built over the past 3 years. More than furniture, it symbolized my commitment to building something lasting and meaningful. At exactly 4 o'clock, my family began arriving in a convoy of vehicles that seemed oddly coordinated. Patricia Rodriguez, my mother, emerged from her sedan wearing the pinched expression she reserved for occasions when she felt obligated to participate in something she disapproved of. My older brother Marcus climbed out of his pickup truck, immediately lighting a cigarette despite knowing I'd asked everyone to keep my new property smoke-free. My sister Diana arrived with her husband Kevin in their SUV, both of them wearing expressions that suggested they were attending a funeral rather than a celebration. "Well, look at this," Patricia announced as she surveyed the front of my house, her voice carrying the particular tone she'd perfected over the years for delivering backhanded observations. "Someone's certainly gotten ambitious." My father Harold emerged slowly from the passenger seat of Marcus's truck, his weathered hands gripping his walking cane with more force than necessary. At 72, he maintained the stoic demeanor that had characterized his approach to parenting throughout my childhood. His silence often spoke louder than any words, and today his carefully neutral expression conveyed volumes about his feelings regarding my achievement. "Welcome to my new home," I said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice despite the cool reception. "I'm so excited to show you everything." Diana pushed past me toward the front door, her heels clicking against the stone pathway I'd had professionally installed. "How much did this place cost you, Nina?" she asked without preamble. "Because Kevin and I have been looking at houses for 2 years and we can't find anything decent we can afford." The question landed like a physical blow, though I tried not to show it. Diana had always possessed an uncanny ability to identify the most sensitive aspects of any situation and probe them relentlessly. As children, she'd been the one to ask why I spent so much time studying instead of playing, why I chose academic clubs over social activities, why I seemed to think I was smarter than everyone else. "I worked very hard to save for this," I replied carefully, unlocking the front door and gesturing for everyone to enter. "I'd love to give you the full tour." The interior of my home had been designed with both comfort and functionality in mind. The open-concept living area featured warm earth tones and carefully selected artwork from local artists, creating an atmosphere that felt both professional and welcoming. The kitchen, with its modern appliances and generous counter space, opened into a dining area perfect for entertaining clients or hosting small gatherings. Marcus wandered into the living room, ash from his cigarette falling onto my new hardwood floors despite his promise to extinguish it outside. "This is pretty fancy for someone who grew up in Oakwood," he observed, settling into my new sofa without removing his work boots. "Remember when we used to share a bedroom in that two-bedroom apartment on Elm Street?" The reference to our childhood living situation felt deliberately pointed. Marcus had always resented what he perceived as my attempts to distance myself from our family's working-class background. When I'd received the scholarship to attend State University, he'd made numerous comments about how I was getting too good for my family. When I'd landed my first job at a downtown consulting firm, he'd questioned whether I was ashamed of where I came from. "I remember everything about growing up in Oakwood," I said quietly, leading the group toward the home office that had required months of planning and budget, including how hard Mom and Dad worked to give us opportunities. Patricia followed behind the group, her sharp eyes cataloging every detail of my carefully chosen furnishing. "All this space for just one person," she murmured to Harold, though her voice was pitched loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Seems wasteful when there are families with children who can't find decent housing." The observation stung because it contained just enough truth to be difficult to dismiss. Housing costs in our metropolitan area had risen dramatically over the past few years, making homeownership increasingly difficult for young families. Several of my colleagues at work had expressed frustration with the competitive real estate market, and I knew that Diana and Kevin had been genuinely struggling to find something within their budget. But Patricia's comment also revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had characterized our relationship throughout my adult life. In her worldview, success was something to be suspicious of rather than celebrated, particularly when it elevated someone above their expected social position. My achievements weren't viewed as validation of hard work and determination, but as evidence of selfishness and pretension. "Here's my home office," I announced, opening the French doors to reveal the space I was most proud of. The room featured built-in bookshelves, excellent natural lighting, and the magnificent hand-carved desk that served as the centerpiece. "This is where I'll be meeting with clients and working on my consulting project." Kevin entered the office and immediately zeroed in on the expensive-looking equipment. "That's a pretty high-end computer setup for someone in finance," he observed, running his hand over the curved monitor I'd purchased specifically for financial modeling work. "Must have cost more than I make in a month. I need professional-grade equipment for my work," I explained, though I could hear the defensive tone creeping into my voice. "Financial consulting requires sophisticated software and reliable technology." Diana positioned herself beside the desk, her fingers tracing the intricate wood inlays with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. For a moment I thought she might offer a compliment or acknowledge the craftsmanship involved. Instead, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Nina, can I ask you something honestly?" she said, her voice taking on the concerned tone she typically used when preparing to deliver particularly cutting observations. "Don't you think all this is a bit much for someone your age? I mean, you're 27 years old, and you're living like you're some kind of executive or something." The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I felt the familiar sensation of family dynamics shifting into patterns that had been established decades earlier. Diana had always been the family member designated to voice concerns that others might consider but not express directly. Her questions often carried the weight of collective family opinion, even when she claimed to be speaking only for herself. "I don't understand what you mean," I replied, though part of me understood exactly what she meant. In our family's framework, success was supposed to be gradual, modest, and always tempered by appropriate humility. Dramatic achievements or rapid advancements suggested character flaws rather than merit. Marcus stubbed out his cigarette on the windowsill, leaving a small burn mark on the wood I'd had professionally refinished. "What Diana's trying to say is that this whole setup seems kind of flashy," he said, gesturing broadly at the office. "Like you're trying to prove something to somebody." "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said, feeling my composure beginning to crack. "I saved for 3 years to buy this house. I work 70 hours a week to build my consulting practice. I chose every detail carefully because this represents my commitment to building something lasting. Patricia had been silent throughout this exchange, but now she stepped forward with the authoritative presence that had dominated family discussions throughout my childhood. "Nina, sweetheart, your family is worried about you," she began, her voice carrying the patient tone she used when explaining obvious truths to stubborn children. "This lifestyle you're pursuing, this obsession with material success, it's not healthy for a young woman." The word obsession felt like a slap. For years I'd watched my mother work double shifts at the textile factory to help support our family, and I'd absorbed her lessons about the dignity of hard work and the importance of financial responsibility. Now, those same values were being reframed as character defects when applied to my own life. "I'm not obsessed with material success," I protested. "I'm building a career and investing in my future. Isn't that what you and Dad always taught us to do?" Harold spoke for the first time since entering my house, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of decades of manual labor and practical wisdom. "We taught you to work hard and be grateful for what you have," he said slowly. "We didn't teach you to put on airs and live beyond your means." The accusation of living beyond my means struck particularly deep, because it was so fundamentally unfair. Every purchase I'd made had been carefully planned and budgeted. The house had been within my approved mortgage range, and I'd selected it precisely because it represented responsible financial planning rather than overextension. My savings account contained enough for 6 months of expenses, and my consulting practice was generating steady income with a growing client base. "I'm not living beyond my means, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice respectful despite my growing frustration. "I can afford this house comfortably, and my business is doing well." "Your business," Diana repeated with a laugh that contained no humor. "Nina, you work for other people. You don't have a business. You have a job that you've convinced yourself is more important than it actually is." The dismissal of my consulting practice felt like the cruelest cut of all. Over the past 2 years, I'd built a client base that included several small businesses and individual investors who relied on my financial analysis and strategic planning. My work had helped a local restaurant chain optimize their cash flow, assisted a young couple in developing a realistic retirement strategy, and provided crucial guidance during a complicated merger between 2 family-owned companies. "I have my own consulting practice," I said firmly. "I work with independent clients, and I'm building something that belongs to me." Marcus stood up from the sofa, brushing cigarette ash off his jeans and onto my floor. "Listen, Nina, we're not trying to be mean," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We're trying to help you understand that this whole thing is getting out of hand. You're 27 years old, living alone in a house that's too big for you, spending money on furniture that costs more than most people's cars, and acting like you're some kind of business owner." "I am a business owner," I repeated, but the words felt hollow in the face of their collective skepticism. Patricia moved closer, her expression softening into the maternal concern that had always been her most effective weapon in family conflict. "Sweetheart, we love you and we want what's best for you," she said gently, "but this path you're on, this need to prove that you're different from your family, it's going to lead to disappointment. People like us, we don't live in houses like this. We don't pretend to be something we're not." The phrase "people like us" encapsulated everything I'd been fighting against since childhood. It represented a worldview that defined identity through limitations rather than possibilities, that viewed ambition as a form of betrayal rather than growth. In my mother's framework, attempting to transcend your circumstances wasn't admirable determination but dangerous pretension. "I'm not pretending to be anything," I said, though I could feel my confidence wavering under the weight of their collective disapproval. "I worked hard, I saved money, I bought a house, and I started a business. These are normal things that people do." Kevin had been quietly examining the certificates and awards displayed on my office walls, including the framed scholarship certificate that had made my college education possible. "Normal for who?" he asked, turning back toward the group. "Nina, you make more money than any of us. You live in a neighborhood where none of us could afford to visit regularly, and you spend your time with clients who probably look down on working-class families like ours. The accusation that I associated with people who looked down on my family felt particularly unfair because it was based on assumptions rather than evidence. My clients were diverse in both background and income level, and I'd always been proud of my ability to work effectively with people from different socioeconomic circumstances. But Kevin's comment revealed a deeper fear that my success represented a rejection of family values and loyalty. My clients don't look down on anyone, I said, and I would never associate with people who disrespected my family. Diana had moved to the window overlooking my backyard, where I'd spent weeks establishing a small garden with vegetables that reminded me of the plants my grandmother had grown in her tiny plot behind our childhood home. "You know what I think?" she said without turning around. "I think you've convinced yourself that you're different from us, that you're better than us, and this house is just a way of making that feeling real." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. For months I'd been planning this housewarming party as a way of sharing my joy with the people who mattered most to me. I'd imagined showing them each room with pride, explaining the choices I'd made, and receiving their approval and support for what I'd accomplished. Instead, I found myself defending basic life decisions against attacks that seemed designed to undermine my sense of achievement and belonging. Every positive aspect of my new home was being reframed as evidence of character flaws or misplaced priority. My success was being portrayed not as the result of hard work and careful planning, but as a symptom of selfishness and pretension. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," I said, though my voice lacked conviction even to my own ears. "I love my family and I'm proud of where I come from." Patricia's expression hardened, and I recognized the look she got when patience was exhausted and truth-telling was about to begin. "If you love your family and you're proud of where you come from, then why are you working so hard to distance yourself from us?" she demanded. "Why did you move to the most expensive neighborhood in the city? Why do you spend your time with clients instead of family? Why do you act like the way we live isn't good enough for you anymore?" Each question felt like a physical blow because they all contained kernels of truth that were difficult to deny. I had moved to an expensive neighborhood, though it was because I wanted a safe area with good amenities and proximity to my work. I did spend considerable time with clients, though it was because building a successful consulting practice required dedication and availability. I had developed tastes and preferences that differed from my family's, though it was the natural result of exposure to different experiences and opportunities. But Patricia's questions also revealed the impossible position I'd been placed in. Any evidence of growth or change was interpreted as rejection of family values, while any attempt to maintain connection was viewed as insufficient commitment to my roots. Success was suspect, ambition was selfish, and achievement was pretentious. The doorbell rang, interrupting the tense family discussion and providing a momentary reprieve from the escalating conflict. I excused myself to answer it, grateful for any distraction from the increasingly hostile atmosphere in my living room. David Chen stood on my front porch, holding a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of calm professional demeanor that had made him one of the most respected bank presidents in our metropolitan area. At 52, he possessed the quiet confidence that came from decades of successful financial leadership, and his presence immediately shifted the energy of the situation. "Nina, congratulations on your new home," he said warmly, extending the wine with a genuine smile. "I hope I'm not arriving at an inconvenient time." David's presence at my housewarming party was both expected and significant. As my primary business banker, he'd been instrumental in securing the mortgage for my house and providing the credit lines that had enabled my consulting practice to expand. But more than a professional relationship, we'd developed a mentoring dynamic that had proved invaluable as I navigated the challenges of entrepreneurship. "Mr. Chen, thank you so much for coming," I replied, expecting the wine and stepping aside to let him enter. "Please, meet my family." As we returned to the living room, I noticed an immediate change in the atmosphere. My family's body language shifted subtly, with Marcus extinguishing his cigarette, and Diana straightening her posture in response to David's obvious authority and professionalism. The presence of someone from outside our family circle seemed to impose a temporary restraint on the escalating conflict. "This is my mother, Patricia Rodriguez," I began, attempting to regain some sense of normal social interaction. "Mom," This is David Chen, the president of Metro First National Bank. Patricia extended her hand with the formal politeness she reserved for interactions with people she considered socially superior, though her expression remained carefully neutral. Miss Chen, it's nice to meet you, she said in the tone she used when speaking to doctors or teachers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Rodriguez, David replied graciously. You must be very proud of Nina's accomplishments. She's built an impressive consulting practice in a remarkably short time. The compliment seemed to catch my family off guard, particularly because it came from someone whose professional opinion carried obvious weight. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Diana exchanged a glance with Kevin that suggested surprise at this external validation of my work. Nina's always been ambitious, Harold said carefully, his tone neutral but watchful. David moved into the living room with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to social situations, his eyes taking in the details of my home with apparent appreciation. Ambitious is exactly the right word, he agreed, but more than that, she's demonstrated exceptional financial discipline and strategic thinking. The way she planned and executed this home purchase was textbook financial management. His professional assessment of my achievement created a moment of cognitive dissonance that I could see playing out across my family's faces. Here was an expert in financial matters, someone whose opinion they couldn't easily dismiss, directly contradicting their narrative about my irresponsible spending and pretentious lifestyle choices. The house is lovely, David continued, accepting my invitation to examine the home office. This workspace is particularly impressive. It's clear that considerable thought went into creating an environment that supports both productivity and client confidence. As David examined the hand-carved desk and professional equipment, I felt a surge of validation that had been missing throughout the family visit. His appreciation was based on understanding the practical requirements of my work rather than emotional reactions to my success. Thank you, I replied. I wanted to create a space that reflected the quality of service I provide to my clients. Marcus had followed us into the office, his expression skeptical as he watched David's positive reaction to my setup. Mr. Chen, can I ask you something? He said, using the deferential tone he employed when speaking to authority figures. Do you really think Nina needs all this fancy equipment for what she does? David turned to Marcus with the patient expression he probably used when explaining financial concepts to uncertain clients. Financial consulting requires sophisticated analytical tools, he explained. Nina works with complex data sets, creates detailed financial models, and produces professional presentations for her clients. The equipment and software she's invested in are essential tools of her trade. The explanation, delivered with quiet authority, seemed to deflate some of Marcus's skepticism, though his discomfort with the situation remained obvious. Deanna had positioned herself near the window again, her attention focused on the view of my backyard garden rather than the conversation about my professional requirements. Well, Patricia said with forced brightness, it's certainly impressive to meet one of Nina's business associates. She's told us so much about her work. The statement was entirely false. I'd shared very little about my work with my family, because their reactions typically ranged from indifference to active discouragement. But Patricia's comment represented an attempt to maintain social propriety in front of David, while avoiding direct acknowledgement of her previous criticisms. David appeared to sense the underlying tension, though his response remained diplomatically neutral. Nina has built something remarkable, he said. It's always gratifying to see young entrepreneurs succeed through hard work and smart planning. The word entrepreneur seemed to strike my family with particular. Deanna turned away from the window, her expression sharp with renewed focus on the conversation. Kevin straightened in his chair, while Marcus actually took a step backward, as if the term carried physical weight. Entrepreneur, Deanna repeated slowly. Is that really what Nina is? Because we've been trying to understand exactly what her business involves. David's eyebrows rose slightly, suggesting surprise at the question. Absolutely, he replied without hesitation. Nina operates an independent financial consulting practice. She has multiple clients, generates her own revenue, manages her own business expenses, and builds her client base through referrals and reputation. That's entrepreneurship by any definition. The professional validation felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in family disapproval. For months, I'd questioned whether my consulting work truly constituted a legitimate business, or whether my family's skepticism was justified. David's clear, authoritative assessment provided the external perspective I'd been lacking, but I could also see that his validation was having an unintended effect on my family's mood. Instead of being pleased that their initial concerns had been addressed, they seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the widening gap between their perceptions and professional reality. Patricia's smile became more strained as she processed David's assessment. "Well, that's wonderful," she said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "We had no idea Nina's work was so—" The pause before substantial carried volumes of meaning, suggesting that my family's previous dismissal of my achievements had been based on incomplete information rather than accurate assessment. But rather than being pleased by this revelation, Patricia seemed disturbed by the implications for her worldview and family dynamics. Kevin had been unusually quiet throughout David's visit, but now he leaned forward with renewed focus on the conversation. "Mr. Chen, can I ask you about something?" Said. "We've been concerned about whether Nina might be overextending herself financially with this house purchase. Do you think she's being realistic about her ability to maintain these expenses?" The question felt like a final attempt to find professional validation for their concerns about my financial decisions. If David confirmed that my home purchase was financially irresponsible, it would justify their criticism and restore their narrative about my poor judgment. David's response was immediate and definitive. "Nina's mortgage application was one of the strongest I've reviewed in recent years," he said. "Her debt-to-income ratio is excellent, her credit score is outstanding, and her business income demonstrates consistent growth. From a banking perspective, she represents exactly the kind of responsible borrower we hope to work with." The professional assessment landed like a bombshell in the middle of the living room. Every concern my family had raised about my financial irresponsibility, every suggestion that I was living beyond my means, every implication that my success was unsustainable, had just been contradicted by the region's most respected banking authority. Marcus actually laughed, though the sound contained no humor. "Well, I guess we don't know our sister as well as we thought," he said, stubbing out another cigarette despite being inside my house. The comment represented a moment of recognition that the family narrative about my life had been fundamentally incorrect, but rather than leading to celebration or apology, it seemed to increase their discomfort with the situation. The cognitive dissonance between their assumptions and reality was creating psychological pressure that manifested as increased hostility rather than revised understanding. Diana had been silent during David's financial assessment, but now she turned from the window with an expression I recognized from childhood conflicts. "This is all very interesting," she said with forced calm, "but I think we need to have a family conversation without outside observers." The dismissal of David as an outside observer felt deliberately disrespectful, particularly given his professional standing and the valuable insights he'd provided about my business and financial situation. But it also revealed Diana's recognition that his presence was interfering with the family dynamic she was trying to establish. David seemed to understand the subtext immediately, responding with the diplomatic grace that had undoubtedly served him well throughout his banking career. "Of course," he said smoothly, "I should let you enjoy your family time. Nina, thank you for the invitation, and congratulations again on your beautiful home." As David prepared to leave, he paused at the front door and spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. "Nina, you've built something impressive here," he said. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Your success is legitimate, your business is solid, and your financial planning is exemplary." The private validation felt like armor against the criticism I knew was coming once David departed. His professional assessment had provided objective confirmation of what I'd hoped was true about my achievements, even as my family's reactions suggested a different reality entirely. After David left, the atmosphere in my living room shifted dramatically. The temporary restraint imposed by his presence evaporated, and I could feel the tension that had been building throughout the afternoon reaching a critical point. Patricia was the first to speak, her voice carrying a cold fury that I'd rarely heard before. "Well, Nina," she said, settling into my expensive sofa with an expression of disgust. I hope you're satisfied with yourself. The opening salvo felt like a declaration of war, and I braced myself for what I sensed would be a confrontation that would fundamentally alter my relationship with my family forever. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud as I stared at my mother's furious expression. Patricia had positioned herself in the center of my living room like a general preparing for battle, her arms crossed, and her eyes blazing with an intensity that made my stomach clench with familiar childhood dread. "Satisfied with what exactly?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would cut deep. "With making us look like fools in front of your fancy banker friend," Marcus interjected before Patricia could respond. He had lit another cigarette despite my repeated request to keep my home smoke-free, and the ash was creating small gray stains on my new coffee table. "Acting like we don't know anything about our own daughter's life." Diana moved away from the window and joined the circle of family members who seemed to be closing in around me. "That man just told us that you make enough money to qualify for a mortgage that costs more than Dad's annual pension," she said, her voice rising with each word. "Were you planning to share that information with your family, or were we supposed to keep guessing about your mysterious income?" The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to make me question my own choices. I had been deliberately vague about my financial situation, partly to avoid uncomfortable conversations about money and partly because I'd sensed that my success would create tension rather than celebration. But their response to David's professional assessment suggested that my instincts had been correct. "I didn't think you were interested in the details of my work," I replied, settling into the armchair that faced the sofa where most of my family had arranged themselves. Whenever I've tried to explain my consulting practice, the conversation usually changes to something else. Kevin let out a bitter laugh that echoed through my carefully designed living space. "Maybe because you always made it sound like you were just helping people with their taxes or something," he said. "You never mentioned that you were running some kind of major financial operation." Harold had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he cleared his throat with the authority that had commanded respect throughout my childhood. "Nina, your mother and I raised you to be honest with your family," he said slowly, his weathered hands gripping his walking cane with visible tension. "Keeping secrets about money isn't something we taught you." The phrase "keeping secrets" felt like an unfair characterization of my privacy, but I could see how my family might interpret my discretion as deception. I'd been careful not to discuss specific client fees or project revenues, both for professional confidentiality reasons, and because I'd anticipated exactly the kind of uncomfortable reaction I was witnessing. "I haven't been keeping secrets," I protested. "I've been building a business and trying to be professional about client relationships. There's a difference between privacy and deception." Patricia's expression hardened further, and she leaned forward with the intense focus she brought to difficult conversation. "Professional about client relationships," she repeated mockingly. "Listen to yourself, Nina. You sound like some kind of corporate executive talking about business strategies and professional requirements." The criticism of my language revealed something deeper about the growing divide between my family and me. Words that felt natural and appropriate in my professional context apparently sounded pretentious and alienating when used in family settings. But the alternative seemed to be deliberately dumbing down my communication to avoid triggering their discomfort with my evolution. "I am talking about business strategies and professional requirements," I said, trying to keep frustration out of my voice. "That's what running a consulting practice involves." Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing toward my kitchen with aggressive energy that made me worry about potential damage to my carefully chosen furnishings. "Running a consulting practice," he said with exaggerated emphasis. 3 years ago you were living in a studio apartment and eating ramen noodles for dinner. Now you're talking like you're some kind of business mogul." The reference to my previous living situation felt deliberately cruel because it ignored the intentional sacrifices I'd made to achieve my current success. I had lived modestly not because I was struggling financially, but because I was prioritizing long-term goals over immediate comfort. Every dollar saved on rent and food had been invested toward the down payment that eventually made my home purchase possible. "I made sacrifices to build something better," I said quietly. "That's called planning and discipline, not pretending to be something I'm not." Diana had been examining the artwork on my walls with apparent fascination, but now she turned back toward the group with an expression that suggested she'd reached some kind of conclusion. "You know what I think the real problem is," she announced, settling back into her seat with the satisfaction of someone about to deliver a devastating insight. "Please, enlighten us," I replied, though I immediately regretted the sarcastic edge in my voice. "I think you've been lying to us for years about what your life is really like," Diana said with calm conviction. "Not just about money, but about everything. Your friends, your social circle, your values, your priorities. You've been pretending to be the same person you were when you lived in Oakwood, while actually becoming someone completely different." The accusation hit me like a physical blow because it forced me to confront uncomfortable questions about authenticity and identity that I'd been avoiding for months. Had I been deliberately deceiving my family about my evolution, or had I simply been trying to maintain connection while growing in directions they couldn't understand or accept? "I haven't been pretending to be anyone," I said, though the words felt hollow even to my own ears. "People change as they gain experience and opportunities. That's normal adult development." Kevin had been quietly observing the family dynamics, but now he spoke with the careful deliberation he used when making important points. "Normal for who, Nina?" he asked. "Because in our family, in our community, people don't usually change so dramatically that their own relatives can't recognize them anymore." The phrase, "can't recognize them anymore," felt like the cruelest assessment of all because it suggested that my growth had fundamentally altered something essential about who I was. In Kevin's framework, authentic identity was fixed and immutable, while significant change indicated loss of authentic self rather than personal development. "I'm still the same person," I insisted, though I wasn't entirely sure what that statement meant anymore. "I still care about the same things. I still value family and hard work and integrity. I've just been fortunate enough to build a successful career." Patricia's laugh contained no warmth or humor, just bitter recognition of what she perceived as continued deception. "The same person," she repeated slowly. "Nina, the daughter I raised, would never have bought a house in Riverside Heights while her sister and brother-in-law are struggling to find anything they can afford. The daughter I raised would never have furnished her home with custom-made furniture that cost more than most people's cars. The daughter I raised would never have made her family feel unwelcome in her own home." Each accusation felt like a separate knife wound because they all contained kernels of truth that were difficult to deny. I had chosen to live in an expensive neighborhood while my family struggled with housing costs. I had invested in high-quality furnishings while they dealt with financial limitations. I had created an environment that clearly made them uncomfortable, though that had never been my intention. "I never wanted to make anyone feel unwelcome," I said, feeling tears threatening despite my efforts to maintain composure. "I wanted to share my success with the people I love most." Marcus had returned from his tour of my kitchen, and now he settled back onto my sofa with an expression of grim satisfaction. "Share your success," he said mockingly, "by showing us everything we can't afford and making us watch while some banker tells us how financially sophisticated our little sister has become." The characterization of David's visit as a deliberate humiliation felt particularly unfair because his presence had been coincidental rather than planned. But I could see how his professional validation of my achievements might have felt like a coordinated demonstration of my family's ignorance about my actual circumstances. "Mr. Chen's visit wasn't planned," I protested. "He came to congratulate me on the house purchase, and I introduced him to you because I thought you'd want to know about the professional relationships I've built." Diana leaned forward with renewed intensity, her eyes fixed on mine with laser focus. "Professional relationships," she repeated. "Nina, do you hear yourself? You're talking about your banker like he's some kind of personal friend or mentor. That's not normal behavior for someone from our background." The criticism of my relationship with David revealed another layer of the cultural divide that was separating me from my family. In their worldview, professional relationships were transactional and hierarchical, while personal relationships were based on shared background and social position. The idea that professional respect could evolve into genuine mentorship crossed boundaries they considered inappropriate or pretentious. "David has been helpful as I've built my consulting practice," I explained. He's provided valuable guidance about business banking and financial planning. That's exactly the kind of professional support that helps small businesses succeed. Harold had been listening to this exchange with growing discomfort, and now he spoke with the moral authority that had shaped my childhood understanding of right and wrong. "Nina, there's something you need to understand about your situation," he said slowly, his voice carrying decades of hard-earned wisdom. "Success that separates you from your family isn't real success. It's just another form of failure." The statement hit me like a sledgehammer because it encapsulated the impossible position I'd been placed in. According to my father's logic, any achievement that elevated me beyond my family's circumstances was inherently corrupting rather than praiseworthy. True success, in his framework, required maintaining the exact social and economic position I'd been born into. "I don't want to be separated from my family," I said desperately. "That's why I invited you here today. I wanted to celebrate with you and show you what I've been working toward." Patricia's expression softened slightly, though her fundamental disapproval remained unchanged. "Sweetheart, we appreciate that you wanted to include us," she said with forced patience. "But can't you see how this looks from our perspective? You've built a lifestyle that excludes us by definition. We can't afford to live in neighborhoods like this. We can't afford furniture like this. We can't relate to the kind of work you do or the people you associate with." The assessment was brutally honest and impossible to refute. I had indeed created a lifestyle that differed dramatically from my family's circumstances, though it had been the result of deliberate choices and hard work rather than arbitrary pretension. But the gap between our situations was undeniable, and I was beginning to understand that the distance might be unbridgeable. "I never intended to exclude anyone," I said quietly. "I just wanted to build something better for myself." Kevin stood up and walked toward my home office, examining the space with renewed attention to details he'd missed during his first visit. "Something better," he said thoughtfully. "Nina, that phrase right there tells us everything we need to know about how you see your family." I felt my stomach drop as I realized the implication of my word choice. By describing my life as something better, I had inadvertently suggested that my family's circumstances were inferior rather than simply different. The linguistic slip revealed assumptions I hadn't even realized I was making. "That's not what I meant," I protested, but the damage was already done. Diana had caught the significance of the moment immediately, and her expression shifted from anger to something closer to hurt. "Actually, I think that's exactly what you meant," she said softly. "You think you've built something better than what the rest of us have. You think your education and your career and your house and your professional relationships make you better than your family." The accusation of thinking myself better than my family struck at my deepest fears about success and identity. I had spent years trying to balance achievement with humility, progress with loyalty, individual growth with family connection. But Diana's assessment suggested that I had failed catastrophically in that balancing act. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," I said, though even as the words left my mouth I wondered if they were entirely true. Had my success generated unconscious feelings of superiority that I'd been hiding even from myself? Marcus had been watching this exchange with growing agitation, and now he exploded with frustration that had been building throughout the afternoon. "Then why do you live like you're better than us?" he shouted, gesturing broadly at my carefully furnished living room. "Why do you work with clients who have more money than our entire family combined? Why do you talk about business strategies and professional development like you're some kind of executive?" The questions came like machine gun fire, each one designed to highlight the contradictions between my claims of equality and the reality of my lifestyle choices. I could feel my defensive composure cracking under the relentless assault on my character and motivation. "I work hard and I've been successful," I said, my voice rising to match his intensity. "That doesn't make me better than anyone. It just makes me financially independent." Patricia had been silent during this latest exchange, but now she stood up with the decisive movement that had always signaled the end of her patience. "Financially independent," she repeated with bitter emphasis. "From your family, from your community, from everyone who actually knows who you are underneath all this expensive pretense." The phrase "expensive pretense" felt like the final verdict on everything I'd worked to build. In my mother's assessment, my home, my business, my professional relationships, and my lifestyle were all elaborate performances designed to hide my true identity rather than authentic expressions of who I had become. "This isn't pretense," I said desperately. "This is my life. I worked for it. I earned it. And I'm proud of what I've accomplished." Harold struggled to his feet, using his walking cane for support, but moving with determined purpose toward the front door. "That's exactly the problem, Nina," he said without turning back to look at me. "You're proud of accomplishments that required you to abandon everything your mother and I taught you about humility, loyalty, and knowing your place in the world." The phrase "knowing your place in the world" encapsulated everything I had been rebelling against since childhood, though I'd never articulated it quite so clearly before. My parents had raised me to accept limitations as natural and appropriate, while I had spent my adult life systematically challenging and transcending those boundaries. "My place in the world isn't determined by where I was born or what my family's income level was," I said, following him toward the front door. "My place in the world is something I create through my choices and actions." Patricia gathered her purse with sharp, angry movements that conveyed her complete rejection of my philosophical framework. "Your choices and actions," she said mockingly. "Nina, you sound like one of those self-help books that tell people they can become anyone they want to be if they just work hard enough and believe in themselves." The dismissal of personal agency and self-determination felt like an attack on the fundamental principles that had guided my adult life. I had indeed believed that hard work and strategic planning could help me transcend the circumstances of my birth, and my success seemed to validate that approach. "I do believe that people can improve their circumstances through hard work and smart choices," I said defiantly. "My life is proof that it's possible." Marcus had joined the general exodus toward my front door, but he paused to deliver one final assessment that would haunt me for months afterward. "Your life is proof that some people are willing to sacrifice their family relationships for material success," he said coldly. "Whether that's actually an improvement is a matter of opinion." Diana was the last to leave, and she turned back toward me with an expression that combined pity and disappointment in equal measure. "Nina, I hope someday you figure out who you really are underneath all this," she said quietly. "Because the sister I grew up with was worth knowing, even if she didn't live in Riverside Heights." The suggestion that my authentic self had been buried beneath material success felt like the cruelest cut of all, because it implied that personal growth and achievement were inherently corrupting forces. In Diana's framework, the person I had become was a lesser version of who I had once been, rather than an evolved and improved iteration. As my family filed out of my home, their footsteps echoing across the hardwood floors I'd saved months to afford, I felt a complex mixture of emotions that I couldn't immediately process. Relief that the confrontation was finally over, mixed with devastation that it had ended so badly. Anger at their refusal to celebrate my achievements, combined with guilt about the ways my success had indeed created distance between us. But underneath all those immediate emotional responses was something else. A growing determination to understand exactly what had just happened and why. My family's reaction to my success had been so uniformly negative and so completely disconnected from my own experience of achievement that I began to wonder if there were aspects of my situation I wasn't seeing clearly. After the last car pulled away from my driveway, I walked slowly through my house, seeing it with fresh eyes after the afternoon's brutal assessment. The hand-carved desk that had represented professional achievement now seemed like evidence of pretentious spending. The carefully chosen artwork that had brought me joy now appeared calculated to impress rather than express authentic taste. The granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that had felt like practical improvements now looked like status symbols designed to signal superiority. I settled into my home office, the space I'd been most excited to show my family, and tried to process what had just occurred. For months I'd been anticipating this housewarming party, as a celebration of everything I'd worked toward. Instead, it had become a devastating referendum on my character, my values, and my relationship with the people who had shaped my fundamental understanding of right and wrong. The silence in my house felt oppressive after hours of family conflict, and I found myself questioning assumptions I'd held for years about success, achievement, and personal growth. Had I really become the selfish, pretentious person my family seemed to see? Was my professional success genuinely incompatible with maintaining authentic family relationships? Had my pursuit of financial independence required sacrifices that I hadn't fully acknowledged? As evening descended over Riverside Heights, I sat in my expensive chair at my custom-made desk and began to examine my life with the kind of systematic analysis I typically applied to client projects. If my family's assessment contained any validity, I needed to understand exactly where my choices had led me, and whether the path forward required fundamental changes to my priorities and approach. The first area I examined was my financial situation, partly because it had been such a central focus of the afternoon's criticism. David Chen's professional assessment had confirmed that my home purchase was financially responsible and that my business income was solid and growing. But my family's shock at learning about my income level suggested that I had indeed been deliberately vague about my financial circumstances. I pulled up my business financial records and client payment history, examining the data with fresh perspective. Over the past 18 months, my consulting practice had generated significantly more revenue than I'd ever explicitly discussed with my family. Not because I was ashamed of my success, but because I'd sensed that specific numbers would create exactly the kind of discomfort and resentment I'd witnessed today. The client list included several businesses and individuals whose projects had been both financially rewarding and professionally satisfying. A local restaurant chain had paid substantial fees for cash flow optimization analysis that had helped them expand into 2 new locations. A young couple had invested in comprehensive retirement planning services that had positioned them for long-term financial security. A family-owned manufacturing company had hired me to analyze potential merger opportunities, work that had ultimately saved them from a disastrous acquisition attempt. Each project represented genuine value creation, rather than arbitrary fee generation, and the income I'd earned reflected the quality and impact of my analytical work. But I could also see how the cumulative financial success might appear surprising to family members who had heard only vague descriptions of my professional activity. The second area I examined was my social and professional relationships, which had also come under attack during the afternoon's confrontation. My family had suggested that I associated primarily with people who looked down on working-class families, and that my professional network represented a rejection of my roots, rather than an expansion of my opportunity. I reviewed my client relationships and professional connections with this criticism in mind, trying to assess whether there was validity to their concern. David Chen had indeed become something like a mentor, but our relationship was based on mutual professional respect rather than social pretensions. My clients came from diverse backgrounds and income levels, though they shared common needs for financial analysis and strategic planning services. The professional associations I'd joined and the networking events I attended were focused on skill development and business growth, rather than social climbing or status enhancement. But I could see how these activities might appear to prioritize professional advancement over family relationships, particularly since they occupied considerable time and mental energy. The third area I examined was my living situation and lifestyle choices, which had been the most visible targets of family criticism. My house in Riverside Heights was indeed expensive by their standards, though it represented careful financial planning rather than impulsive luxury spending. My furnishings were high quality and carefully chosen, though they reflected professional needs and personal taste rather than status-seeking behavior. But as I walked through my home with my family's words echoing in my mind, I began to notice details that might indeed appear pretentious or excessive to people with different financial circumstances. The hand-carved desk, while functionally excellent for my work needs, was undeniably an expensive choice that signaled certain priorities and values. The professional-grade computer equipment, while necessary for complex financial modeling, represented a significant investment that might seem unnecessary to people unfamiliar with my work requirements. Most troubling was the growing realization that I had indeed been making choices that prioritized my individual advancement over family connection and community involvement, not intentionally or maliciously, but as the natural result of focusing intensely on professional development and financial independence. I had moved to Riverside Heights partly for safety and amenities, but also because it provided a professional address that enhanced my credibility with certain types of clients. I had invested in expensive furnishings partly for functionality and quality, but also because they created an environment that impressed potential business partners. I had developed relationships with people like David Chen, partly for mentorship and guidance, but also because such connections provided access to opportunities that might not otherwise be available. The pattern that emerged from this self-examination was complex and uncomfortable. I had not deliberately set out to distance myself from my family or community, but many of my choices had indeed created that distance as an unintended consequence. My pursuit of professional success had required time, energy, and financial investments that limited my availability for family relationships and community involvement. More fundamentally, my evolving identity as a successful entrepreneur had created psychological distance from my origins that was probably more significant than the geographical or financial separation. I thought differently about money, career, relationships, and life planning than my family did, and those differences had become more pronounced as my professional experience expanded. But even as I acknowledged these uncomfortable truths, I struggled with the question of whether they represented genuine character flaws or simply the natural consequences of personal growth and professional development. Was it inherently wrong to prioritize individual achievement over family harmony? Was it selfish to pursue opportunities that elevated me beyond my family's circumstances? Was it pretentious to develop tastes and preferences that differed from my upbringing? The questions felt impossible to answer definitively because they touched on fundamental philosophical differences about the nature of success, identity, and social obligation. My family operated from a worldview that prioritized group loyalty and social stability over individual advancement and personal transformation. I had developed a perspective that emphasized personal agency and strategic planning as tools for transcending inherited limitations. Neither approach was inherently superior, but they were becoming increasingly incompatible as my success continued to grow and evolve. The afternoon's confrontation had forced me to recognize that maintaining authentic relationships with my family while pursuing continued professional development might require difficult choices and uncomfortable compromises that I hadn't previously considered. As I sat in my home office late into the evening, surrounded by the symbols of success that had triggered such strong negative reactions from the people I loved most, I felt a growing determination to understand exactly what was happening in my life and why. The answers wouldn't come from continued self-examination alone, but would require a more systematic investigation of the dynamics that had led to this crisis. I opened my laptop and began making notes about the key issues that had emerged during the family visit: the financial secrecy concerns, the social and professional relationship questions, the lifestyle and identity conflicts, and the broader philosophical differences about success and family loyalty, all needed to be addressed with the same analytical rigor I brought to client projects. But I also recognized that this investigation would require perspectives and insights that I couldn't generate independently. The afternoon's events had revealed significant blind spots in my understanding of how my choices were perceived and their impact on the people around me. Moving forward would require input from trusted advisors who could provide objective assessment of my situation and strategic guidance for navigating the complex challenges ahead. The first call I made was to Carlos Mendoza, my assistant and closest professional confidant, asking him to clear my schedule for the following week so I could focus entirely on understanding and addressing the family crisis. The second call was to Lisa Thompson, my former supervisor and current mentor, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss personal and professional boundary issues that were affecting my business development strategy. The third call was the most difficult to Dr. Amanda Foster, a family counselor who had been recommended by colleagues dealing with similar conflicts between professional success and personal relationships. I had never seriously considered therapy before, viewing it as something for people with more serious problems than my own. But the afternoon's events had convinced me that I needed professional guidance to navigate dynamics that were beyond my expertise. As I prepared for bed in my expensive house in my exclusive neighborhood, I felt a strange mixture of determination and uncertainty about the path ahead. The investigation I was planning might reveal uncomfortable truths about my choices and priorities that would require significant changes to my approach, but it might also validate my achievements and provide strategies for maintaining family relationships while continuing to pursue professional growth. Either way, I was committed to understanding exactly what had happened during my housewarming party and why, so I could make informed decisions about how to move forward. The emerald bracelet my grandmother had left me sat on my nightstand, catching the light from my bedside lamp and reminding me that previous generations of women in my family had also faced difficult choices about tradition and progress, loyalty and independence. Tomorrow the real work would begin. The following Monday morning arrived with an unexpected phone call that immediately shifted my focus from introspection to crisis management. Carlos Mendoza's voice carried an urgency I'd rarely heard as he delivered news that made my stomach drop with dread. "Nina, we have a serious problem," he said without his usual morning pleasantries. "3 of our major clients called over the weekend to postpone their ongoing projects. They're all citing concerns about our firm's stability and reputation." I sat up in bed, instantly alert despite having slept poorly since the disastrous housewarming party. "Which clients?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Rodriguez Family Restaurants, Oakwood Manufacturing, and Sullivan and Associates," Carlos replied grimly. "That's roughly 40% of our current revenue stream. They're all asking for refunds of advance payments and requesting immediate return of confidential documents." The names hit me like physical blows because they represented not just significant financial losses, but the erosion of professional relationships I'd spent years building. Rodriguez Family Restaurants was owned by distant relatives who had initially been skeptical about hiring me, but had become enthusiastic advocates after my cash flow analysis helped them avoid bankruptcy during the previous year's economic downturn. "Did they give specific reasons for their concerns?" I asked, though a sick feeling in my stomach suggested the answers would be personally devastating. Carlos hesitated before responding, a pause that told me the news was worse than I'd imagined. "Nina, there are rumors circulating about your personal life and business practices. Someone has been making phone calls to your client base, raising questions about your financial management and professional ethics." The revelation that someone was actively sabotaging my business relationships felt like a nightmare scenario I'd never seriously considered. Building a consulting practice required trust and reputation above all else, and deliberate attacks on my credibility could destroy everything I'd worked to create. "What kind of questions?" I pressed, dreading the answer but needing to understand the scope of the problem. "Questions about whether you're living beyond your means, whether your business income is sustainable, whether you're too inexperienced to handle complex financial analysis," Carlos explained reluctantly, "but also more personal attacks about your loyalty to family and community, your commitment to local business relationships, and your connection to your cultural background." Each accusation felt precisely calibrated to undermine both my professional competence and personal character. Someone with intimate knowledge of my circumstances and vulnerabilities was systematically attacking the foundations of my business relationships. "Do we know who's making these calls?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would confirm my worst fears about family loyalty and revenge. "The clients won't give specific names," Carlos replied carefully, "but they all mentioned receiving calls from people who claimed to be concerned family members who wanted to share important information about your character and business practices." The confirmation that my own family members were actively working to destroy my professional relationships felt like the ultimate betrayal. Not content with rejecting my success privately, they were now attempting to ensure that I couldn't maintain it publicly. "What's our immediate response strategy?" I asked, forcing myself to shift into crisis management mode, despite the emotional devastation of learning about my family's sabotage campaign. "I've prepared damage control communications for all affected clients," Carlos. "Detailed documentation of our past performance, third-party verification of our business practices, and professional references from David Chen and other banking relationships. But Nina, we need to address this systematically and quickly before it spreads further." As I dressed for what I already knew would be a crucial day for my business survival, I felt a cold determination replacing the confusion and self-doubt that had plagued me since the weekend. My family had chosen to escalate our private conflict into a public war against my professional reputation. That decision had fundamentally changed the nature of our dispute and my approach to resolving. By 9 o'clock, I was seated in my home office with Carlos, Lisa Thompson, and James Park, the attorney I'd contacted for guidance on protecting my business interests. The atmosphere was tense, but focused as we reviewed the scope of the attacks and developed comprehensive response strategy. The good news is that the accusations are vague and unsubstantiated, James began, reviewing the notes Carlos had compiled from client conversations. The bad news is that in consulting relationships, perception often matters more than reality. We need to address both the specific concerns and the broader reputation management issues. Lisa leaned forward with the intensity she brought to complex business challenges. Nina, I need to ask some direct questions about your family dynamics, she said seriously. Is there any chance this sabotage campaign will escalate beyond client relationships? Are we looking at potential legal challenges, media attacks, or other forms of public pressure? The question forced me to consider possibilities I'd been avoiding since discovering the scope of my family's retaliation. Patricia and Marcus had always been capable of holding grudges, but their willingness to attack my business relationships suggested a level of vindictiveness that might not be limited to professional sabotage. I honestly don't know, I replied, but based on their reaction to my success, I think we should prepare for continued escalation until they feel they've sufficiently punished me for embarrassing them. James took detailed notes as we discussed potential vulnerabilities and protective measures. We'll need to document everything carefully, he advised. If this continues to escalate, we may need legal remedies to protect your business interests and personal reputation. The first priority was immediate damage control with affected clients. I spent the morning making personal calls to Rodriguez family restaurants, Oakwood Manufacturing, and Sullivan and Associates, not to argue with their decisions, but to provide clear, factual information about my business practices and financial situation. The conversation with Miguel Rodriguez, the family patriarch who had initially hired me, was particularly painful because our professional relationship had evolved into genuine mutual respect and trust. His voice carried obvious discomfort as he explained his decision to suspend our working relationship. Nina, you understand that family business means everything to us, he said heavily. When family members express concerns about someone's character and reliability, we have to take those concerns seriously, even when it's difficult. I understand your position completely, I replied, though it took considerable effort to keep bitterness out of my voice. I'm disappointed that family members would choose to sabotage professional relationships rather than address their concerns directly with me. But I respect your need to protect your business interests. The professionalism of my response seemed to surprise Miguel, and his tone softened slightly. Nina, for what it's worth, your work has been excellent, and I hope you can resolve whatever family issues are causing these problems. If you can provide some kind of verification that these concerns are unfounded, we'd be open to reconsidering our decision. The offer of potential reconciliation provided a concrete goal for my damage control efforts. Rather than simply defending against attacks, I could work proactively to demonstrate that the accusations were baseless and motivated by personal rather than professional concern. By noon, Carlos and I had developed a comprehensive response package that included financial documentation, client references, professional certifications, and third-party validations of my business practices. The materials were designed to address each specific concern that had been raised, while maintaining professional dignity and avoiding personal attacks on my family member. But even as we worked to contain the immediate damage, I was painfully aware that my family's sabotage campaign could continue indefinitely unless I found ways to address the underlying conflicts that had motivated their attack. The battle for my business reputation was just beginning, and I needed strategies that went beyond defensive damage control. The afternoon brought an unexpected development that would prove crucial to my long-term survival strategy. David Chen called with information that shifted my understanding of the entire situation and provided new options for responding to my family's attacks. Nina, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I've been hearing disturbing rumors about your business practices, he began carefully. I wanted to reach out personally to offer whatever support might be helpful during what I assume is a difficult time. His diplomatic approach suggested that the rumors had already reached the banking community, a development that could threaten my access to credit and financial services regardless of their accuracy. Yes, thank you for calling directly rather than simply believing what you've heard, I replied gratefully. I'm dealing with a coordinated campaign to undermine my business relationships, and I appreciate the opportunity to address any concerns you might have. Actually, Nina, I'm calling because I have information that might be useful to you, David said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. The person who contacted our bank to raise questions about your financial situation made some claims that are demonstrably false, but also revealed information about your family circumstances that suggests a more complex situation than simple business concern. My pulse quickened as I realized that David might have insights into my family's motivations and methods that could be crucial for developing effective countermeasures. What kind of information? I asked carefully. Without going into specifics, it appears that your family members have been researching your business relationships and financial situation quite extensively, David explained. They seem to have detailed knowledge about your client base, your income levels, and your professional association. This suggests a planned campaign rather than spontaneous concerns about your welfare. The revelation that my family had been systematically investigating my business activities felt like a violation that went far beyond the personal conflicts I'd expected to navigate. They had apparently been building a case against me for some time, gathering ammunition for the attacks they eventually launched. David, I need to ask whether this situation affects my banking relationships or credit standing, I said directly, recognizing that my financial foundation could be threatened regardless of the accuracy of the accusations. Not at this point, he assured me. Your financial records speak for themselves, and the bank's assessment of your creditworthiness is based on documentation rather than rumors. But Nina, I think you should know that this isn't the first time we've seen family business conflicts escalate into attacks on professional relationships. The suggestion that my situation wasn't unique provided both comfort and concern. If similar conflicts were common enough for bankers to recognize the patterns, it meant I wasn't alone in facing these challenges. But it also suggested that the problems might be more serious and long-lasting than I'd hoped. Do you have recommendations for how to handle this type of situation? I asked. In my experience, the most effective approach is complete transparency and proactive communication, David replied. Rather than responding to each attack individually, consider addressing the situation comprehensively, with all your professional contacts. Explain the family conflict clearly, provide documentation of your business practices, and demonstrate that you're handling the situation professionally. The strategy made immediate sense because it would allow me to control the narrative rather than simply reacting to my family's accusations. Instead of appearing defensive or secretive, I could present myself as a professional dealing responsibly with personal challenge. That's excellent advice, I said. Would you be willing to provide a professional reference if needed? Absolutely, David replied without hesitation. But more than that, I think you should consider whether your family's behavior might constitute interference with business relationships in ways that could have legal implications. The suggestion that my family's actions might be legally actionable had occurred to me, but I'd been reluctant to consider formal legal responses to what I'd initially viewed as personal conflict. David's perspective as a neutral professional observer carried weight that my own emotional assessments might lack. After ending the call with David, I immediately contacted James Park to discuss the legal dimensions of my family's sabotage campaign. His assessment was sobering but also empowering. Intentional interference with business relationships can constitute tortious conduct under certain circumstances, he explained. If we can document that your family members made false statements about your business practices with the intent to damage your professional relationships, we might have grounds for legal action. The possibility of taking legal action against my own family felt deeply uncomfortable, but I was beginning to understand that their escalation had moved our conflict beyond the realm of personal disputes into legitimate business protection territory. What would be required to pursue that kind of legal remedy? I asked. Documentation of the false statements, evidence of their intent to harm your business interests, and proof of actual damages to your professional relationships, James replied. Based on what you've told me about client losses and reputation damage, we might already have sufficient grounds to proceed. The afternoon concluded with a strategic planning session that established both immediate and long-term goals for addressing the crisis. Carlos would continue managing client communications and damage control. Lisa would help me develop a comprehensive transparency strategy for all professional relationships. James would begin documenting potential legal responses to continued family sabotage. But the most important development was my growing recognition that this battle would require me to choose definitively between maintaining family relationships and protecting my professional survival. My family had made that choice for me by escalating personal conflicts into business attacks, but I still needed to accept the implications and respond accordingly. That evening, I received a call that confirmed my worst fears about the scope and sophistication of my family's campaign. Dr. Amanda Foster, the family counselor I'd contacted for guidance, had received a call from someone claiming to be a concerned family member who wanted to discuss my mental health and business practice. "Nina, I've never experienced anything quite like this," she said, clearly disturbed by the content. The caller had detailed information about your professional relationships and seemed to be fishing for information they could use to support claims about your psychological state and decision-making capacity. The attempt to involve mental health professionals in their sabotage campaign represented a new level of sophistication and vindictiveness that shocked me despite everything I'd already experienced. My family wasn't just attacking my business relationships. They were apparently trying to build a case that I was psychologically unstable and therefore inherently unreliable. "Did you provide any information?" I asked, though I trusted Dr. Foster's professionalism even under pressure. "Of course not," she replied firmly. "Professional confidentiality protects our communication regardless of outside pressure." "But Nina, this suggests a coordinated effort that goes far beyond normal family conflict. You may need to consider more aggressive protective measures than you've been planning." The warning crystallized my understanding of the situation's seriousness and the inadequacy of my defensive approach. My family wasn't just expressing disapproval of my success, they were systematically working to destroy my ability to maintain that success. Responding effectively would require strategies that matched the sophistication and determination of their attack. I spent the late evening hours developing what I began to think of as a comprehensive counteroffensive strategy. Rather than simply defending against individual attacks, I would proactively address the entire situation with transparency, documentation, and strategic communication designed to neutralize their sabotage efforts while protecting my long-term business interests. The first component was a detailed written statement explaining the family conflict and my business practices, supported by financial documentation and professional references. This statement would be sent to all current and potential clients, banking relationships, professional associations, and other relevant contacts before my family could reach them with their accusation. The second component was a coordinated media strategy that would position me as a successful entrepreneur, dealing professionally with family conflicts, rather than someone whose business practices were legitimately questionable. Lisa had contacts at business publications who might be interested in a story about family business conflicts and their impact on entrepreneurial success. The third component was aggressive legal protection, including cease and desist letters to family members engaged in sabotage, documentation of all false statements and their business impact, and preparation for potential defamation lawsuits if the attacks continue. The strategy felt both necessary and deeply sad because it represented the complete breakdown of family relationships I'd spent my entire life trying to maintain. But my family's decision to attack my professional survival had made those relationships unsustainable regardless of my preferences or effort. As I finalized my plans for what would essentially be a declaration of war against my own family's sabotage campaign, I felt a strange sense of liberation mixed with profound loss. The woman who had desperately sought family approval just days earlier was gone, replaced by someone who understood that protecting her achievements might require sacrificing the relationships that had once seemed most important. The emerald bracelet my grandmother had left me caught the light as I worked late into the night, and I found myself wondering whether she had faced similar choices between family loyalty and personal achievement. The stories I'd heard about her business success had always focused on her determination and strategic thinking, but perhaps they had omitted the personal costs and family conflicts that achievement had required. By midnight, I had completed a comprehensive action plan that would launch the following morning with coordinated communications to all my professional contacts, simultaneous legal notices to family members engaged in sabotage, and a strategic media campaign designed to control the narrative about my situation. The battle for my business survival and professional reputation was about to begin in earnest, and I was finally ready to fight with the same intensity and sophistication that my family had brought to their attacks. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the outcome would determine whether the success I'd worked so hard to build could survive the determined efforts of my own family to destroy it. The gloves were off, and tomorrow would reveal whether my strategic response could overcome their coordinated sabotage campaign. I'd learned too much about business warfare and reputation management to approach this battle with anything less than complete commitment to victory, regardless of the personal costs involved. The transformation in my professional landscape began within 48 hours of launching my comprehensive counteroffensive, though the first signs of change came from an entirely unexpected source. Elena Martinez, the Dean of State University's School of Business, called my office on Wednesday morning with a proposition that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of both the immediate crisis and my long-term career development. "Nina, I've been following the situation with your family's interference in your business relationships," she began without preamble, her voice carrying the directness that had made her one of the most respected academic administrators in our region. "I'm calling because I believe there's an opportunity here that extends far beyond damage control." The concept of opportunity emerging from crisis felt foreign after days of defensive maneuvering and reputation management, but Dr. Martinez's perspective carried weight that demanded serious attention. As my former professor and current professional mentor, she had guided my transition from academic theory to practical business application with insights that had proved invaluable. "I'm listening," I replied, settling into my desk chair with renewed focus on possibilities rather than problems. "The university has been developing a new executive education program focused on family business dynamics and entrepreneurial success," she explained. "Your situation presents a real-world case study that could provide tremendous value to business leaders facing similar challenges. More importantly, it positions you as an expert rather than a victim." The reframing was brilliant in its simplicity and strategic implication. Instead of being someone whose family conflicts had created business problems, I could become someone whose professional expertise enabled others to navigate similar challenges successfully. The narrative shift would transform my current crisis into evidence of specialized knowledge and resilience. "What would that involvement look like practically?" I asked, already sensing that this opportunity could provide exactly the kind of positive exposure needed to counteract my family's negative campaign. "A speaking engagement next month at our annual entrepreneurship summit, followed by potential consulting work with family businesses facing succession and conflict issues," Dr. Martinez replied. "The university would provide a platform for you to demonstrate your expertise while addressing your current situation transparently and professionally." The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Rather than waiting months for my family's accusations to fade from memory, I could immediately establish myself as a thought leader in an area where my recent experiences provided unique credibility and insight. "I'm very interested," I said, "but I want to be completely transparent about the legal and professional dimensions of my current situation." "Actually, that transparency is exactly what makes this opportunity so valuable," Dr. Martinez assured me. "The business community needs to understand how personal conflicts can impact professional relationships, and how successful entrepreneurs protect their interests while maintaining ethical standards." Within hours of confirming my participation in the university program, I received calls from 2 business journalists who had learned about my situation through academic networks rather than family sabotage. Their interest was focused on the broader implications of family conflict and entrepreneurial success stories rather than the personal drama that my relatives had been attempting to publicize. The first interview with Sarah Kim from Regional Business Journal lasted nearly 2 hours and covered everything from my consulting methodology to my strategies for maintaining professional relationships during personal crises. Her questions were sophisticated and focused on extracting actionable insights rather than sensational details. What advice would you give to other entrepreneurs who find themselves facing family pressure to limit their success? She asked toward the end of our conversation. The most important thing is to recognize that family members who truly want your success will celebrate your achievements rather than sabotage them, I replied, drawing on insights that had crystallized during my recent experiences. When family conflicts arise from your professional growth, the issue isn't usually your behavior, but rather their comfort with change and achievement. The interview was scheduled to appear in the following week's issue alongside a feature story about innovative approaches to family business consulting, positioning me as an expert resource rather than someone whose professional judgment had been questioned by concerned relatives. The second interview with Marcus Thompson from Tech Valley Business Weekly focused specifically on my analytical methods and client success stories. His research had included conversations with several of my current clients who spoke enthusiastically about my work and expressed surprise that anyone would question my professional competence. Your client retention rate and project success metrics are exceptional for someone with your level of experience, he observed. How do you explain the disconnect between these objective measures and the concerns that have apparently been raised about your business practice? Family members who lack direct experience in professional services sometimes misinterpret success as evidence of problems rather than accomplishments, I explained carefully. They may view rapid growth or high-profile clients as signs of overextension rather than recognizing them as validation of effective strategy and execution. Both interviews would be published with accompanying sidebars featuring testimonials from David Chen and other professional colleagues, creating a comprehensive portrait of competence and integrity that would be difficult for my family's accusations to overcome. But the most significant development came on Thursday afternoon when Miguel Rodriguez called to request a meeting to discuss resuming our working relationship. His tone was markedly different from our previous conversation, carrying a mixture of embarrassment and renewed confidence in my professional capabilities. "Nina, I owe you an apology," he began, when we met at his restaurant's main location. "After our conversation earlier this week, I decided to do some independent research into your background and business practices. What I discovered was impressive enough that I started questioning the motivations behind the concerns that were raised." The admission that he had conducted his own investigation rather than simply accepting my family's accusations felt like a crucial victory in the broader battle for my professional reputation. "I appreciate your willingness to look beyond the initial concerns," I replied diplomatically. "Family conflicts can create complicated situations that don't always reflect professional realities." Miguel nodded grimly. "Nina, I've been in family business for 30 years, and I've seen how personal dynamics can distort professional judgment. What happened to you isn't unusual, but it's also not acceptable. We'd like to not only resume our working relationship but expand it to include some projects we hadn't previously discussed." The offer of expanded collaboration represented more than just restored income. It was validation that my professional reputation could not only survive coordinated attacks, but actually strengthen as people recognized the disconnect between accusations and reality. "I'd be honored to continue working with your organization," I said. "But I want to be completely transparent about the ongoing family situation and the potential for continued interference attempts." "Actually, that's another reason we want to work with you," Miguel replied with a slight smile. "Someone who can handle family sabotage professionally while maintaining business relationships demonstrates exactly the kind of crisis management skills we need for some of our more challenging projects." The afternoon brought additional confirmation that momentum was shifting decisively in my favor. Oakwood Manufacturing CEO Robert Sullivan called to schedule a meeting for the following week, explaining that his board had reviewed my professional credentials and client testimonials and concluded that their initial concerns had been misplaced. "We may have acted hastily in suspending our working relationship," he admitted. "After examining your track record more carefully, we're confident that any family issues you're dealing with don't impact your professional competence or business ethic." Even more encouraging was a call from Jennifer Walsh, the CEO of a regional manufacturing consortium, who had heard about my situation through business networks and wanted to discuss potential consulting opportunity. Her interest was specifically related to my experience managing complex stakeholder relationships during periods of conflict and uncertainty. Nina, what you're going through is unfortunately common in family businesses and entrepreneurial ventures, she explained. The ability to maintain professional standards while dealing with personal attacks is exactly the kind of expertise our member companies need. By Friday morning, my client pipeline was not only restored, but actually stronger than it had been before my family's sabotage campaign began. The transparency strategy had worked exactly as David Chen had predicted, with professional contacts appreciating my direct communication about the situation, rather than viewing it as evidence of instability or poor judgment. The legal front was also developing in ways that strengthened my position considerably. James Park had successfully served cease and desist letters on Marcus and Diana, formally notifying them that continued interference with my business relationships could result in defamation lawsuits and damages claims. The legal pressure seems to be having the desired effect, he reported during our Friday afternoon strategy session. We haven't detected any new sabotage attempts since the letters were delivered, and several of your professional contacts have mentioned that the negative calls have stopped completely. The cessation of active sabotage provided breathing room for continued reputation, but it also suggested that my family was either regrouping for different tactics or recognizing that their initial strategy had backfired catastrophically. What's our assessment of their likely next moves? I asked, recognizing that sustained vigilance would be necessary even if immediate attacks had ceased. They have three basic options, James explained. Complete withdrawal from the conflict, which seems unlikely given their apparent investment in the initial campaign. Escalation to more aggressive tactics like media attacks or legal challenges, which would be risky and expensive. Or shifting to indirect approaches like social pressure and community influence, which would be harder to document but less legally vulnerable. The analysis suggested that my family would probably attempt to isolate me socially even if they couldn't continue attacking me professionally. But my growing network of business relationships and academic connections provided insulation against community-based pressure tactics that might have been devastating just weeks earlier. The weekend brought an unexpected personal development that provided additional perspective on my evolving situation. Maria Santos, my neighbor in Riverside Heights, stopped by with information that revealed the extent to which my family's campaign had extended beyond professional circles into community gossip and social speculation. Nina, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but there have been some concerning conversations about you at community events, she began diplomatically. I thought you should know what's being said and who's saying it. The revelation that my family had been spreading negative stories about me in social settings felt invasive, but not particularly surprising given their apparent commitment to damaging my reputation comprehensively. What kind of conversation? I asked, settling into my living room with the resignation of someone who had already absorbed considerable criticism. Questions about whether you're really as successful as you appear, whether your house purchase was financially responsible, whether you've become disconnected from your cultural roots. Maria explained carefully, but Nina, what's interesting is how people are responding to these concerns. Her observation that community reactions might not align with my family's expectations provided hope that social pressure tactics would be less effective than they had anticipated. Most people seem to think that family members who publicly criticize a relative's success are revealing more about their own issues than about the person they're attacking, Maria continued. Several neighbors have mentioned that your professional achievements and community involvement speak for themselves regardless of what family members might claim. The feedback suggested that my family's tactics were generating exactly the kind of negative reaction that David Chen had predicted when he recommended complete transparency about the situation. Rather than damaging my reputation, their public attacks were creating sympathy and respect for my professional handling of personal conflicts. There's something else you should know, Maria added with obvious discomfort. Your mother has been approaching local business owners to share her concerns about your character and reliability. But from what I've heard, these conversations aren't having the effect she probably intended. The image of Patricia systematically contacting local business owners to undermine my reputation felt deeply humiliating, But Maria's assessment that these efforts were backfiring provided some comfort alongside the embarrassment. Business owners who have worked with you or observed your professional behavior seem to view these family attacks as confirmation of your success rather than evidence of problems, she explained. The general consensus appears to be that family members don't usually work so hard to undermine someone, unless that person has achieved something worth undermining. The community perspective validated the strategic approach I'd developed with professional guidance, but it also highlighted the personal costs of my family's betrayal in ways that business metrics couldn't capture. Knowing that my mother was publicly attacking my character in community settings where I lived and worked created emotional pain that professional success couldn't entirely offset. Monday morning brought the most significant validation yet, when Martinez called with news that would establish my expertise and credibility on a regional scale. "Nina, the response to announcement of your participation in our entrepreneurship summit has been extraordinary," she began with obvious excitement. "Registration has increased by 40% since we added your session to the program, and we've received inquiries from business leaders throughout the tri-state region who specifically want to hear your insight." The market response to my expertise confirmed that my approach to the crisis had successfully transformed potential weakness into demonstrated strength. Rather than being seen as someone whose family problems had created business vulnerabilities, I was being recognized as someone whose professional success had generated family conflicts that required sophisticated management strategies. More importantly, Dr. Martinez continued, "We've been contacted by 3 universities that want to develop similar programs using your case study as a foundation. You may have inadvertently created a new niche in business education and consulting. The possibility of building a specialty practice around family business conflict resolution felt like poetic justice given that my own family conflicts had nearly destroyed my existing consulting practice. But it also represented genuine opportunity to help other entrepreneurs navigate similar challenges more effectively than I had initially managed. I'm extremely interested in developing this expertise further," I replied, recognizing that specialization could provide both personal satisfaction and professional differentiation. The afternoon brought additional confirmation that my reputation rehabilitation had succeeded beyond my most optimistic Carlos reported that 5 new prospective clients had contacted our office specifically because they had heard about my professional handling of complex stakeholder conflicts. 3 of them are dealing with family business succession issues that have created tensions between generations, he explained. They specifically want someone who understands how personal relationships can impact business decisions, and who has demonstrated the ability to maintain professional standards during personal crises. The irony that my family's attempts to destroy my business had actually generated new opportunities in exactly the areas where they had created problems was not lost on me. Their sabotage campaign had inadvertently established my credibility as someone who could help others navigate similar challenges successfully. Wednesday brought the ultimate validation when David Chen invited me to present a case study about family business conflicts to the Regional Banking Association's quarterly leadership meeting. The invitation represented recognition that my expertise was valuable not just to potential clients, but to the broader business and financial community. "The banking community deals with family business conflicts regularly," he explained during our planning conversation. "Your insights about managing personal relationships while protecting business interests could be extremely valuable to our members who advise family-owned companies." The speaking opportunity would position me as a thought leader in front of an audience that included the region's most influential financial decision-makers, creating networking opportunities and professional relationships that could support business growth for years to come. But perhaps the most meaningful development was a call from Dr. Amanda Foster, who had been monitoring my situation since my family's attempt to involve her in their sabotage campaign. "Nina, I've been observing your response to this crisis with professional interest," she began. "Your approach to managing family conflict while protecting your business interests represents exactly the kind of healthy boundary setting that many of my clients struggle to achieve." Her assessment that my handling of the situation demonstrated psychological health rather than the instability my family had tried to suggest felt like professional validation of my emotional and strategic approach to the crisis. I'd like to discuss the possibility of developing some educational materials about family business conflicts and healthy response strategies, she continued. Your experience could provide valuable insights for other professionals dealing with similar challenges. The opportunity to contribute to mental health education while demonstrating my own psychological resilience felt like the perfect capstone to my reputation rehabilitation effort. Rather than being seen as someone whose family relationships had created emotional instability, I could establish myself as someone whose emotional intelligence had enabled successful navigation of complex interpersonal challenges. By Thursday evening, I found myself sitting in my home office reviewing a calendar filled with speaking engagements, consulting opportunities, and professional development activities that had emerged directly from my family's attempts to destroy my business relationship. The sabotage campaign that had initially felt devastating had ultimately accelerated my professional growth and established my expertise in areas I had never previously considered. The emerald bracelet my grandmother had left me caught the lamplight as I worked late into the evening, and I found myself thinking about the resilience and strategic thinking that must have been required for her own business success. Perhaps the challenges I was facing represented a family tradition of overcoming obstacles and opposition rather than an unprecedented crisis. The momentum had shifted so decisively in my favor that I was beginning to consider whether my family's campaign had actually been the catalyst needed to elevate my business and reputation to levels I might not have achieved through conventional growth strategies alone. Their attempts to diminish my success had instead amplified it, creating opportunities and recognition that could support decades of continued professional development. As I prepared for bed in my beautiful home that had triggered the original family conflict, I felt a profound sense of gratitude mixed with sadness about the personal costs of my professional triumph. The success was sweeter because it had been tested and validated under pressure, but the price paid in family relationships would require years of processing and acceptance. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to build on the momentum that had emerged from crisis, and I was finally ready to embrace the future without looking backward toward relationships that had been lost in the pursuit of authentic success and professional integrity. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the Grand Ballroom at the Riverside Convention Center, looking out at an audience of 300 business leaders who had gathered for the inaugural Family Business Resilience Conference. The event had sold out within 2 weeks of announcement, with waiting lists that included entrepreneurs from across the tri-state region seeking insights into managing personal relationships while building professional success. The most valuable lesson I learned from my family's attempt to sabotage my business, I began, my voice carrying the confidence that had emerged from months of public speaking and professional recognition, was that authentic success requires the courage to stand alone when necessary, even when that means disappointing the people you love most. The audience leaned forward with attention that had become familiar during my speaking engagement. What had begun as crisis management had evolved into a specialty practice that generated more revenue and professional satisfaction than my original consulting work had ever provided. Carlos approached the stage as I concluded my presentation, carrying a folder that contained contracts for 3 new corporate training programs and speaking engagements that would extend my calendar well into the following year. The business that my family had tried to destroy had not only survived, but transformed into something more sustainable and meaningful than I had originally envisioned. Nina, the Rodriguez family restaurant group, wants to schedule a quarterly workshop series on managing multi-generational business relationships, he whispered as applause filled the ballroom. And State University is asking about developing a formal certificate program in family business consulting. The opportunities represented validation that extended far beyond financial success into recognition as a genuine expert whose insights could help others navigate challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. My grandmother's emerald bracelet caught the stage lights as I gathered my presentation materials, a reminder of the strength that had been passed down through generations of women who had built something lasting despite opposition and criticism. The conference's networking reception provided an opportunity to connect with business leaders whose stories echoed my own experiences in ways that highlighted the universality of family conflict around professional achievement. A technology entrepreneur described her parents' disappointment when she left a secure corporate job to start her own company. A manufacturing executive explained how his siblings had questioned his decision to modernize operations that had remained unchanged for decades. "The pattern is always the same," observed Dr. Jennifer Kim, a family business researcher who had become a close professional colleague. "Family members who haven't taken similar risks struggle to understand why someone would choose uncertainty over security, growth over stability, individual achievement over group harmony." Her analysis had helped me understand that my family's reaction hadn't been personal rejection but rather predictable resistance to change that threatened their worldview and social position. The insight had provided emotional healing that complemented the professional success emerging from the crisis. The evening's highlight came when David Chen approached with news that would cement my reputation in the regional business community permanently. "Nina, the Banking Association's board has voted to establish an annual award recognizing entrepreneurs who demonstrate resilience and ethical leadership during crisis situations," he announced with obvious satisfaction. "They'd like you to be the first recipient." The honor represented recognition not just for surviving family sabotage, but for transforming personal crisis into professional expertise that benefited the broader business community. More than individual achievement, it validated the approach I had developed for maintaining integrity while protecting essential interests. As the reception concluded and guests departed into the cool autumn evening, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had begun with my disastrous housewarming party and led to this moment of professional triumph and personal clarity. The woman who had desperately sought family approval had been replaced by someone who understood that authentic success sometimes required disappointing the people whose acceptance had once seemed essential. The drive home to Riverside Heights took me through the Oakwood neighborhood where I had grown up, past the small apartment building where my family still lived and the community centers where my mother continued her campaign to portray my success as evidence of character defects rather than achievement. The geographical distance between their world and mine had become a metaphor for philosophical differences that might never be reconciled. My house appeared even more beautiful in the moonlight than it had during those first hopeful moments of homeownership. The custom features and carefully chosen furnishings no longer felt like evidence of pretension but rather symbols of the persistence and strategic thinking that had enabled me to build something meaningful despite opposition from the people who should have been my strongest supporters. The home office where my family had delivered their devastating assessment now served as headquarters for a consulting practice that helped dozens of entrepreneurs navigate similar challenges more effectively than I had initially managed. The hand-carved desk that had triggered accusations of pretentious spending now supported work that generated both financial independence and genuine professional satisfaction. Maria Santos had left a note on my front door congratulating me on the conference's success and mentioning that several neighbors had attended my presentation after reading about it in the regional business journal. The community support that had emerged during my crisis had evolved into lasting relationships with people who appreciated achievement rather than resenting it. Inside my kitchen, I found a voice message from Miguel Rodriguez expressing gratitude for the family business workshop I had conducted for his management team the previous week. "Nina, your insights about separating personal feelings from business decisions helped us resolve conflicts that had been undermining our operations for months," his recorded voice explained. "You've given us tools for building stronger relationships while maintaining professional standards." The testimonial represented exactly the kind of impact I had hoped to achieve when I first started my consulting practice, though I could never have imagined that family sabotage would become the foundation for developing expertise that could benefit others facing similar challenges. As I settled into my living room with a cup of tea and reviewed the business cards collected during the evening's networking, I felt a profound sense of completion rather than victory. The battle with my family had ended not with reconciliation or defeat, but with the recognition that some relationships cannot survive fundamental differences about success, achievement, and personal growth. The emerald bracelet my grandmother had left me sat on the coffee table where I had placed it during my morning routine, catching reflections from the fireplace that warmed my beautiful home. The stones seemed to pulse with quiet energy that connected me to generations of women who had chosen independence over approval, achievement over accommodation, authentic success over artificial harmony. My phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Martinez confirming details for next month's university lecture series and mentioning that 3 additional academic institutions had requested similar programming. The opportunities represented not just professional growth but the chance to influence how future entrepreneurs approached the inevitable tensions between individual achievement and family expectation. Tomorrow would bring new consulting projects, speaking engagements, and opportunities to help other business leaders navigate the complex relationships between personal success and social obligation. The work felt meaningful in ways that transcended financial compensation, offering purpose that aligned with the values my grandmother had instilled despite my family's rejection of how those values had manifested in my life. The journey from family rejection to professional recognition had taught me that authentic success requires the courage to disappoint people whose approval comes with conditions that compromise your potential. Some achievements can only be reached by walking alone, and the strongest foundations are built by those willing to stand firm when others try to diminish what they have created. As I prepared for bed in my beautiful home that had triggered the original family crisis, I felt gratitude for both the success I had achieved and the lessons learned through defending it. The woman who had once feared family disappointment had discovered strength that came from choosing integrity over acceptance, growth over stagnation, authentic achievement over artificial peace. The future stretched ahead, filled with possibilities that had emerged directly from the courage to protect what I had built rather than sacrifice it for relationships that required me to diminish myself. My grandmother's legacy lived on not just in the emerald bracelet she had left me, but in the resilience and determination that had enabled me to transform family sabotage into professional expertise and personal empowerment. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.